Right, thank you very much for coming. So the session was called. Oh, sorry, I'm Mark Lever. I am Creative Industries Advisor to the Department for International Trade. So I work with lots of international businesses who are looking to expand and establish in the UK. The session was originally called Going Global, which is a very DIT thing about how you move people out of the country and get them on planes. And then I bumped into a very small games business in Bristol called Lo-Fi Games, who rang me and said, a YouTuber in Japan covered our game and our Steam revenue has just spiked exponentially and we're really, really massive in Japan from the games hub of Bristol. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So it's not about going global, it's about being global, I decided. And the intention over the next 50 minutes or so, we really want to explore what it means to be a global business in the UK. A lot of the talk today, Matt Hancock talked about the nexus of art and technology being the centre of the future economy. He also talked about the international reach. But what I'm interested in is, what does it mean to be a creative technology business in the UK? Technology allows us to distribute tasks wherever we want to distribute them. So what's it mean to be a hub? What does it mean to be the UK as a creative hub now and over the next 10 years? So I have a stellar lineup here, and we're going to explore that. I'm expecting that you're going to talk as much as we're going to talk. So if you have any questions, then just shout. We have no format here, and I'd rather we had an informal conversation than we just talk to you. So just wave at me, and I'll lead to a question, and I will come to you for questions. How are we doing? We're good. We're great. We're perfectly timed. So first of all, I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves so you know exactly who they are and what they do, and then we'll get into some questions. So, Sue, do you want to start? Do you want me to play a film first, or do you want to?
Well, let me do a small preamble. I've rather cheated because Mark gave us a 4-minute time limit to introduce ourselves, so I brought along a 3-minute film. So I only have to. I know. My name's Sue Lister. I have the rather dubious job title of Executive in Charge of ILM's London studio. For those who don't know, ILM stands for Industrial Light and Magic. We are a division of Lucasfilm, which is now owned by Disney. We were founded by George Lucas in 1975 when he began production on the first Star Wars film. And we initially did physical special effects, model making, and then that side of the business fell away entirely, and now it's what we call visual effects. And I'm sure that Alex will talk more about that as well. Globally, we employ over 2,000 people. We have offices in Singapore, San Francisco. San Francisco is our head office, and where we grew out of, Vancouver, and London is the newest addition. I opened the London studio in 2014. There was me and 3 colleagues in serviced accommodation. I remember Mark visiting us at the time. We now employ over 500 people. And as I say, I've rather cheated by bringing a reel of our recent work. A lot of Star Wars. We don't only do Star Wars, we don't only work for Disney, but I think to hook it into this conversation, nearly every project that you'll see on here, and it is rather bombastic, I apologise for that, and that's kind of the nature of what we do, nearly all the work on here was worked globally, so every ILM studio will have touched this, so we will have had teams in multiple locations working on this stuff.
Good, we'll come back to that.
touching me. I told them we were friends.
There you go, big opening. Thank you.
That's what we do.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, back one. Next, Pip, I'd like you to introduce the Dots.
Hi, I'm Pip Jameson. I am the founder of The Dots, which Forbes very kindly asked if was the next LinkedIn. I guess the reason they asked that is because we look after what we call no-collar professionals. So this is creators, freelancers, entrepreneurs. The way the platform works is people post projects, but then tag the full teams around that project. So an app could go up and say this was the UI designer, this UX designer, this is the front-end engineer, this is the back-end engineer. And we kind of work like a community-driven IMDb, where you can discover people and teams behind projects. So we are 3 years old. We work with over 8,000 brands that now use us to find talent. So everyone from the BBC to Tate to Google, who they find individuals through the site, but also teams. I started the platform partly because I used to work at MTV, and I was really frustrated I was finding it really hard to connect with great talent, specifically diverse talent. So we've kind of put diversity at the heart of everything the Dots does. So we're currently 61% female membership, over 34% BAME, 16% LGBT, and we also do a lot of work on socioeconomic diversity. And neurodiversity, because I'm dyslexic. Is anyone in the room dyslexic, by any chance? So, yay. Okay, just fun fact, 35% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic and 40% of self-made millionaires, so it's a superpower. I closed a 4 million investment round just before Christmas, so I'm in that scale-up mode, including recently returning from a trip to Silicon Valley to explore international expansion plans through that. That is me in a nutshell. That was way quicker than before. I don't have a fancy video, but there are lots of fancy videos on the Dots if you ever want to watch that.
Thanks, Pip. Danny, can you introduce Breakout?
Sure. So again, I don't think our videos ever followed Star Wars, so I'm quite excited.
I gave it a
was the
gap,
warm-up,
all right?
So I'm Danny. I'm the COO of Blipper, which is a company specializing in augmented reality. Does everybody know what augmented reality is? Okay, so we essentially provide the software that allows camera lenses to be able to recognize and understand the physical world, and then overlay digital content to provide valuable, contextualized, fun, entertaining experiences back. We are very much a software company, so we don't create any hardware. We are device agnostic. And we see a world where AR, and I mean this, not in a scary way, but will kind of take over our everyday experiences and our everyday engagements with the physical world as we move, most likely over the next few years, from a world where all of our AR is fed through your phones and your handsets to a combination of handsets, headsets, eyewear, etc. So there's a lot to look forward to over the next few years. We've been around since 2011. The majority of our clients are brands in the FMCG space. We've been kind of the quickest to embrace AR, as well as the agency, advertising agency space. And in terms of our international strategy, we've grown, we've downsized, we've grown again, we've learned lots of lessons along the way. We, in a way, have pretty much as much of a presence in the US as we do over here, but we've also had some great experiences in Japan, in Turkey. We've got a back-end tech team in Bangalore, so there's quite a lot to cover there from an international perspective. And I have to ask this, how many people have the app on their phones?
I think I.
So, great, so hopefully 26 new downloads by the end of the session.
New audience.
Great.
Let's show you your film.
Oh, yes.
Fabulous, thank you. And last but not least, Alex, could you introduce yourself and DNEG?
Sure. My name is Alex Hope. I'm the MD and co-founder of DNEG. I've got a reel to have a look at the same time, which I'm going to talk over because that's what I love doing.
Do you want me to play it?
Could you? That would be great.
Are we able to put the sound down a little bit on it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So DNEG was set up 20 years ago this year. There were about 30 of us when we started. We worked for one of our now competitors. This is our first film. It's called Pitch Black. Tiny, low-budget sci-fi film. That was about state-of-the-art for visual effects in the UK at the time. I think there were around 300 of us working in the visual effects industry in the UK at the time. Since then, the UK has become a global centre for visual effects. Visual effects companies in the UK have won the Oscar for visual effects, I think, 8 times in the last 10 years, and they've never won it before 2010 when French won it, I think. We've won for Interstellar, Inception, Blade Runner 2049 and Ex Machina, which was a very low-budget British film, and it shows that the growth in creative and technology-based companies in the UK are driving talent in other related industries, the film industry. We've grown from a base in the UK to now have 5,000 people globally in Canada and India, the UK and California. As we've grown, we have tried to retain the culture of the company, and I'll come on to that in a little bit, and to keep creativity at the centre of what we do. Everybody got into the visual effects industry because they loved making great images and working on cool and exciting films, like the ones we're looking at here and the ones that Sue showed earlier. And I think that visual effects plays to the kind of polymath heritage that we have in the UK, bring artists and scientists together. And if Createch is anything, it is about that unifying force that we have in the UK and the opportunity we have to build on that. This is Venom, which we're working on at the moment. These are some trailer shots from that's coming out later in the year. Just talking about the culture, if we can just play the next reel. We have a very simple approach at DNEG. We try and do the best work we can, which will mean that we attract the best talent in the world, and that will produce the best work we can, and we'll end up working with the best people in the world. And we've gone from a small company working with independent directors and producers to working with the likes of Chris Nolan, Ridley Scott, and the best filmmakers in the world. And that is what brings people to a company like DNEG, is that opportunity to work on truly outstanding work for groundbreaking filmmakers and TV program makers. We're a very diverse company. In the UK, 50% of our workforce is British, 50% from the rest of the world, and that's mirrored all over the world, really. We are a growing industry. We're therefore an industry where there is really more work than there is the talent necessarily available. And I think one thing that the UK has done well and needs to continue to do well in years to come is develop talent. And I know that's something that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And we must all invest in that talent, but we must also invest in the technology that underpins everything that we do, and that's what we've tried to do at DNEG as well. Because whilst the work that we do at the moment is for film and television largely, the future is going to be AR, VR, and who knows whatever else in the screen-based creative industries. So that's DNEG.
Thank you very much. So I want to come back to something that you just said there. 15 years ago, there was in Soho in particular an excellent post-production business that worked for a lot of commercials that's transformed with companies like yours into a centre of visual effects, a global centre of visual effects. Why here? Why not somewhere? Why not Paris? Why not Berlin? What were the conditions that make the UK and London in particular a centre of visual effects?
I started off doing commercials through the 90s, worked for a company that did commercials, I think as Sue did as well. Mm-hmm. And I think what the UK was uniquely, globally, was that we had brilliant creativity, but we were also a place where all of the companies working in that space were economically sensible and well-run businesses. And we looked across the world, we looked at what was happening in California, these amazing films being done by Sue's company and others over there. We went, how on earth are we going to do that? And we've done that by focusing on being well-run businesses and at the same time pushing the talent and technology forward. And that's something that certainly in the sort of post-2008 world, where screen audiences generally are flat, revenues are up because ticket sales are up, but our clients want value for money. They want groundbreaking storytelling, but they want to make sure that it's cost effective. And I think the UK visual effects companies have succeeded because of that background in being economically well-run businesses.
I think that also there's also an element. Working for one of those Californian-based companies, and having come from Framestore, which is one of our competitors, I think there's risk taking as well. Actually, within the UK, that the hunger has slightly gone out of the West Coast side of the business. I think that the economic, the well-run businesses, but there's more willingness to take risks that comes with it as well.
And this reflects itself in the work that you're able to deliver.
I think so.
I think also through that period from sort of 2000 for the next 10, 15 years, all the companies that we work for, that Sue has worked for, we've all fought tooth and nail to get work into the UK, but we then collaborate once the work is here.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is build UK PLC, get the world to view the UK as a place where you can do not just one or two big films, but you can do 10 of them at the same time. And in 1998, that was not the case.
Yeah.
We did one big film called Lost in Space, which was very difficult for Soho generally to handle. And now we handle dozens of them simultaneously. And that's because of that ethos that we have.
I think a lot of people think that, and maybe this was the case initially, that the visual effects industry is here because of tax breaks. Actually, I think it's much more of a circular conversation now. I think that this is the centre of visual effects in the filmmaking world. There's no doubt about that. And I speak as a company who isn't headquartered here, but we are now ILM's biggest studio, and I think that's because people are wanting to make their films here, actually because the talent is here. Tax breaks help, but the talent is here.
So let's extend that point, because your businesses are very, very global. You say Bangalore, Vancouver, LA, and on most films you'll find that there's a flow of work which flows between the offices. Is it still incredibly important that the film comes through? As you say, you're the biggest ILM studio now. Well, and DNEG, as you said, leading across the Indian arm and every other arm. How do you take the decision where to flow the work, and is it important that it comes through the front door in the UK? Does that give it a different feel for the client?
Do you want to go first?
I think for us, not all of our projects come through the door of the UK. We run what we call a hub and spoke model, so one studio will take the lead. Often that is driven by our clients. I think we both have West Coast offices because that's where Hollywood is, and it's important. It makes everybody's lives easier. They've got somebody on that time zone, but often it depends where our clients want to work, and by having multiple offices, it gives us that opportunity. Apologies, that is my alarm. So Alex, you pick it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Seamlessly
handed over.
So talent is a key driver of where stuff happens, but tax breaks are absolutely critical. The fact that we've got great, easily accessible tax breaks in the UK brings work here. There are also great tax breaks in Canada, and that's why we've got 2 studios in Canada, and that's why our clients want work to be done in Canada. We have a huge operation in India, the biggest by head count, because our industry is one where we're constantly pushing the envelope creatively in technology terms. But as with many other industries, there's a process of commoditization of types of work. And technology drives that. It makes what were very complex tasks 15 years ago much simpler now. And those need to be done for the best price possible. So having a truly global operation means that we are economically successful from a business perspective, but giving great value to our clients and doing fantastic work. And I think that the visual effects industry has a lot to learn from other more mature industries where the UK is a global centre of, you know, the automotive. We've got a great automotive industry in this country at the very high end, with component work being done elsewhere in the world. And I think that there's a kind of mirror there in how our industry is trending. And it's important in terms of thinking about policy and training and things like that, that one has a view for what the industry will be in the future and not what it is now.
Yeah, yeah. Let's come back to that, but we'll keep moving it on. Danny, I'm interested. I've forgotten that Blipper was 2011. That's very early into AR.
Long time.
The thing that I'm most interested in about Blipper is this idea that you're building a business, which, as you say, there's a slight ebb and flow, but it's been international from its view from the very beginning, and felt that it needed to be in multiple territories from the very beginning, even though the use cases, the revenue scale, the kind of commercialization of AR is still, you know, we're still coming.
Yeah.
But it still it's felt very important to the business to have that global reach and global perspective.
Yeah.
Reflect on that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sure there's an argument to make for exploiting your domestic market as much as possible and staying in the country for longer until you see some of those trends develop. But actually, for us, going international early worked really well, because when technology is at such a nascent stage, you're trying to pick up lessons from as many places as possible, different audiences, different talent pools of engineering, different ideas and kind of, you know, attitudes. So when I look back, every single decision that we've made to go international has had a positive impact on our revenue model. So you know, you're already able to generate more business. But the reality is that, you know, if you look at 2011, we were an app. I mean, we were essentially, you know, download an app, 2D visual image recognition, it'll match something on our server, we'll, you know, give you something back. Where we are now is that we are an AR ecosystem company that has made a number of technology breakthroughs in computer vision that can offer solutions in-app or outside app. So many different things that have been the result of us picking up on a lot of those ideas in other places around the world. You know, a lot of our computer vision work started in the US. Actually, as it happened, you can now hire some of the best computer vision engineers here in the UK, but a lot of those early ideas came from our work in the US. So I think it's a combination of you know, lessons along the way, generating more revenue, and then a couple of other things I'd say. First of all, from a client perspective, if you go international and start developing relationships with big brands, big names in markets, you're then able to pull that together very nicely into an overall global strategy for those companies. And I think, you know, developing relationships with big FMCG brands in the US, here, in Asia, over 2 or 3 years has then allowed us to go back at a group level and say, you know, what can we do with you from a multinational perspective, and way more strategic in terms of nature. So that's from a sales perspective, and then you know, talent learning from each other. You know, so many. We're small enough to be able to have, say, a lead production person here in London managing creative and tech staff in various countries, and as long as, you know, you kind of have the processes in place that allow you to do that in an agile way, our engineers in each of those locations have learned so much from each other, and that's a good thing. So for us, it's been a tremendous experience, and you don't always get it right, and that's the thing. You know, sometimes, and it's happened to us. You know, we've grown in markets that we've then had to downsize a little bit in, or realize that actually it might not have been core to our overall strategy, so you make changes. But if everything is a lesson, then it's positive. And going international, being global, was it being or go? Being global.
Being global.
being global has definitely worked.
I've changed the whole strap line
because
because
I had this whole thing of going global, and now. So yeah, that's been very positive.
I think that's an interesting. So recently, I was on with an Innovate UK mission to India around VR and AR,
Yeah.
and we were very, very struck by the different approaches to very familiar technologies and the different use cases which work in market.
Yeah.
Is there anything specific that you can think of from Japan, or Japan has a very different visual culture. So if you're designing something for user experience there, you have to change what you're doing a lot.
Yeah.
So a particular learning from another.
Yeah, I mean, Japan, for example, they love linking experiences to localization. So really being able to place the user in that particular location and giving lots of personalized content to the street they're in, or kind of part of whatever city in Japan it is. So there's a lot there which actually isn't so relevant to people over here, for example. Then the length of the experience changes depending on the market. Is it a 20-second AR experience, or is it a 2-minute one? How long can you keep people engaged? And there's a big cultural element there of how much time people are willing to invest in the first place. So yeah, I mean, all those sorts of things. Understanding the audience has been critical, but let's not forget that it's such an early stage AR that what works in one country might not in the other. But then once they actually experience different things, then it kind of changes their own perceptions too, and that's been fun. To sort of, just because it works in Japan, and initially you might think it doesn't work in the US, it doesn't mean that it's going to be like that forever. Because if you're able to combine the best of two worlds, then you actually end up with a different offering in a way that might work more effectively in those two markets. So there's been a lot of that.
Yeah.
Try, test, and kind of try again. And
just to come back to your point about the learnings, do you hold the kind of creative culture of Blipper at the centre in London?
No.
Okay.
No. And I mean, our HQ is here. But I'd like to think that we're very much, even though we're small, we're very sort of global in nature. And there are some times, and then it depends on what our teams are like at a particular time. But there's been periods where we've had more creative talent in the US than we have had over here, and that's worked very well for us. And then maybe some of those shift. But no, I think if you sort of try and kind of own it a little bit too intensely over here, then you're missing out on the potential learnings.
Okay, so you need to be agile.
Yeah.
So Pip, let's move on. We had a lot of use of the word talent, and I'm very interested in whether the idea of the talent pool is defensible, and how in a very freelance industry you maintain a talent pool, and what it is that's the kind of the draw here. We talked to a lot of international clients about the unorthodoxy of British creativity. I'd be interested to get your kind of view on that.
Yeah, I think actually this view got properly formulated when I was recently part of the London Mayoral Office, or London and Partners female scale-up mission to the Valley. So it's 15 female founders went over to the Valley. And we had this amazing experience where we were kind of having fireside chats with sort of the COO at Instagram and the CTO at Slack, and etc. And what I came to realize is we were at Google X, which is where Google does all their kind of major innovations, and we were being presented by this amazing woman called Obi, who's now director of Google X. And her punchline was like, she was the first person that didn't have a PhD who'd come into Google X. And what they've started to do at Google is hire humans, what they're calling humans, which I thought was hilarious. And what that synthesized for me is how magic London is, because what's been happening in the Valley, and they were the early movers, was that it's very much a tech space. There are other industries, but it's still predominantly tech over there. So it means that what's been happening in a lot of these businesses is they've been building tech for tech's sake without thinking about the human application of what that technology does. I mean, Apple Watch, I don't know if anyone's got an Apple Watch, it's a perfect example. I mean, it tells me when I've had a bad night's sleep, but I know when I've had a bad night's sleep. I feel like shit in the morning. So wouldn't it be more useful if it said you'd have a bad night's sleep, and then it notifies me, oh, have a banana on the way to work, because potassium helps with a bad night's sleep. And I guess what I've become really passionate about is why London is so great is because it is the melting pot of all the industries in one place. And that is very rare across the world. You know, in the US, technology is mainly in the Valley, you know, US, New York is mainly advertising fashion, LA is film, TV. I'm obviously generalizing, but what is amazing about London is the concentration of all those industries in one ecosystem that can then cross-collaborate. And I think that is very special. It's not completely unique around the world, but in terms of creator clusters, London is the biggest creator cluster in the world, and most people don't know that. There are more creators in London than New York. So it is that magic place where you can do interdisciplinary collaborations between the industries and learn from each other and develop new kind of human technologies as well, which I'm kind of very passionate about.
Human technologies.
Human tech.
I was interested in something you said when we first met, when the Dots first started. You say it was very much about creating my portfolio and my profile, but you're now in a much more kind of facilitator, brokering role of bringing teams together. How do you manage that? The art of bringing a team together to deliver a project is quite an art in its own way to make everybody work well.
We don't manage the kind of choosing the teams. The way it works is people put up the projects and then tag all the teams around it, and then our technology allows us to be able to identify, okay, that team will be good for that project. So, I mean, for example, Google, who's been a client for a couple of years now, you know, they'll do something like they'll search robotics on the Dots and they'll find full teams behind that project, and then they'll just literally poach the full teams to work in the business. So, you know, it's very much a community-driven way of identifying actually who's doing the work. You know, for years we've relied on things like awards, but a lot of time awards only say the top people credit. It means that freelancers are never getting credit for the work, and as the workforce becomes more freelance, it's just a way to identify the actual people who are doing the actual work, which is kind of really exciting to see it being used that way.
So I want to pick up on a point you made about both the diversity of your organisation but also your user base. One of the things I think is interesting is the resilience of this talent pool. How do we ensure that in 10 years' time, London is still the creative hub and we still have those voices? There's been a lot of talk. I've been involved in a project which is a TV-focused project, and all the TV companies are saying, oh, actually, we talk in a very monocultural voice at the moment. Where do we create the new production companies which talk in a very different language? We saw a little bit of that this morning if you've been in the main hall. Where does the young talent come from? How does it get nurtured? How does the Dots play a role in that? The Dots play a role?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge focus for us is more democratizing the creative industries. I mean, when I started out in the creative industries, you know, to get a job, you had to know someone who knew someone who got you the job. I mean, that's how it worked. I mean, it's still a very little black book industry. And I guess one of the core central points of the Dots is having a platform that's open to anyone. For example, we've actually removed that you can search for people by university on the Dots now, because it should be about the talent. It shouldn't be that you could afford to go to a certain university. So that's exactly what we're in business to do. Is great. There are great people doing great work who just not necessarily getting the foot in the door, and that's kind of where we bridge the two. You know, it's a moving beast because, you know, we see massive skills discrepancies as well. You know, there's a huge amount of, for example, people who want to be graphic designers but not enough graphic design roles, but there's a huge demand for UX designers and not enough UX. So, you know, as we move forward, our kind of data around the skills that are missing is getting more sophisticated, so the dream is to allow them to be able to connect the dots moving forward and say you should be doing this course or that course, but we're an aggregator as opposed to us actually training individually.
Mm-hmm. So Alex, I want to bring you in on this because you're that rare person who wrote a report which changed government policy with the Next Gen report.
When we wrote it, we said we need to have computer science in the national curriculum. Lots of people in government said that's never going to happen. And I think 4 years later, Ian Livingstone and I, who co-authored the report, had a glass of champagne because that had happened. But for us, it felt like it was a glacial pace, and civil servants were aghast at how fast it had happened. So yes, it was great to see. I think that we wrote the report because we saw talent as being the biggest barrier to growth in our industry, and I think across the creative industries, and wanting to recognise that the computer is the pencil of the 21st century, and that for our creative industries in the UK to succeed, we need to put computer science skills and art skills at the centre of education for those children who choose to go in that direction. It won't be right for lots of people, but if they choose to do that, they need to be encouraged to do both arts and sciences together. So the STEAM agenda is critical to the ongoing success of the creative industries in this country, and that should be recognised in how we think about apprenticeships and the potential of apprenticeships. And yeah. I could go on for
You could go
ages.
forever.
I won't.
But Danny, I want to bring you in on that as well, because I think that one of the things about AR is it's both an enterprise tool, an entertainment tool, and other things, but the thing that's common to all of that is an ability to build a user experience, a user interface, a narrative that's either the call to action or why I do it, is an interesting place for where creativity meets enterprise.
I mean, it's a total melting pot of both, because again, if you think of our story, initially very focused actually on the entertainment and kind of fun experience side for brands. We now talk to a lot of large corporates about how to utilize our software and the camera lenses that they have in their own devices and whatever it might be. So being able to move from exciting into something that's probably more industrial in nature, a fascinating transition to be able to take that creative talent across to the enterprise side and apply the same amount of flair that you would have in the former, and that's worked extremely well. Extremely well. I think the other thing also, just a couple of things I would add, just more generally. First of all, so much is reliant on the national curriculum, of course. I think there's also a lot around, for those people who have kids, just having that mindset of embracing technology and trying to, before kids even get to school, kind of get them to sort of associate technology with good things. And I mean, obviously at home we have a lot of AR because that's what Dad does. But but my 4-year-old thinks that AR is just completely normal. Just the phone is a gateway to the physical world, and that's just the way it is. And then if she has friends around and they see AR, it's kind of mind blowing, and you sort of see how they've got to go through a kind of learning phase to get to that point and embrace it. So I think a lot of it is also based on that. And then the second point I had in terms of talent, I know all of us sort of talk about this all the time, but just being able, and I don't want to mention the B word, but being able to maintain that flow of talent coming in and out of the country is absolutely key, because it's not about it's not about doing something that will mean that our domestic talent won't have jobs because more people are coming in. It's about making sure that they are way more competitive on the global stage because of that influence that's coming into the country, and frankly because we have scarce resources in the first place. But I think that's key too.
Yeah, can I just chip in on that? People learn most in our industry from their peers. Yeah. There are wonderful courses in this country where people get a good grounding, but they learn most from working in a business. And apprenticeships are most successful when the learning is the student is at the college at the beginning of the course and then working with a company through the rest of their apprenticeship period. And it also lends itself best to the project-based nature of the creative industries. And I think apprenticeship standards should recognise that. And we should recognise that having the brightest and the best people in the world in this country trains the workforce that we need here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think I taught myself how to use a video editing thing while I was a runner making cups of tea and in the gaps. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
But your tea making was dreadful.
The tea making was abysmal. I had to give them a reason for me not to be a runner anymore. And I'm interested in this idea of learning by doing. So I'm very interested in the new industrial strategy and this Audience of the Future funding. The idea that we're putting money into developing content rather than building software platforms, I think is really interesting. As long as you learn the lessons of how we make and we do, and why do we make that decision, especially in an emerging space. How you build R&D and innovation into it by taking some of the risk out, but making sure the risk is still there. That's important. Some questions. Any questions from the floor?
I've got one actually. My name's Martin Nixon. I live in Cornwall and run a small creative agency in Cornwall, literally as far down as you can get in Penzance. And we're talking about global, but this is a slightly old one, I guess. But I wondered whether in this world where we can basically live and work wherever we want to, would any of the panel ever consider opening a small studio in somewhere like Cornwall? Or is that just seen as too far past Bristol's account?
It's a good question.
I mean, I'm happy to sort of kick off. The answer I'm sure would be yes. I mean, I think we have, you look at our footprint and sound, sort of London, New York, Bangalore, very small now, but still a little bit in California, and kind of the ones you would expect for a company like ours. The reality is that we've got a lot of key people in the company that play a very important role in what we do, who have decided that they don't want to work in any of those places, and for personal reasons want to go back to wherever they're from, and we're totally cool with that. And as long as you can have an internal culture that allows to be able to bring all of that together with no negative impact to the company, which actually there never is, then it's absolutely fine. But I guess my point is, it might not mean that we all of a sudden develop a satellite office in any of these places, but the fact that those people are there actually works to our favour, because you've got happy staff who are very content with where they're based, and therefore will contribute more to the company. And if for whatever reason that happened to create a mini ecosystem, say a top hire who is working in another location, working on a project, and they need to hire 3 people, and he or she says, I'd like to do it here locally, not an issue at all.
Yeah, we're actually seeing it on a macro level in terms of the companies we work with. You can see projects being built from teams all over the place. So over 35% of our community, or nearly 30, sorry, about to be hit, 35% of our community aren't based outside London. Yeah. And so we're seeing lots of collectives forms. It doesn't necessarily look like businesses are opening up there. It's like individual studios are setting up and then collaborating with different businesses across the board. And you're sort of seeing cross-studio collaborations and with big businesses. And it's been fascinating to see the rise of the collectives, actually.
I did at one point set up a small studio outside of London.
Yeah.
The key talent issue was the hardest to get over, but once I could find people who actually wanted to live in the other location and train up, then it became a little bit easier. The real challenge, our industry, I often bang on about an economic cluster. We're a very competitive, but as Alex said, a very collaborative industry. We all, in many ways, feed off each other, and we have an ebb and flow business model. So the challenge, my American betters are often saying, well, why won't you move out of London? Stoke looks lovely, and the whilst I think we've all moved out of Soho, apart from one, but we've all slightly moved away. But the challenge often is that sometimes we will downsize and we will let people go at the end of a project. They will then want to go and work for Double Negative, and if Double Negative is in Stoke, that's a little bit more challenging, or in Cornwall. Actually, everybody would love to move to Cornwall.
Yeah. We'll both, if we both do.
Yeah, but that's it. I mean, I often say it will. We would all have to say.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely the key. We're a project-based industry. There is an ebb and flow. We do a lot of reverse recruitment. At the end of a project, we'll phone up Sue or one of the other companies.
I got an email from one of your recruiters the other day saying we're letting these people go.
We want to make sure they stay in the UK, so that when we need them again, they're there, and we don't lose that talent outside of the UK.
I suppose it's this thing with technology now, it basically allows us to work anywhere, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
I think that's the principle's about to be tested to destruction over the next 10 years. Yeah. And I think we've got a government policy to try and balance away from London. We'll see. There was a question right at the back.
Yes. I think it's probably more because the question is about like a two-sided platform. So I'm a CEO of Art Browser, which is a social discovery platform connecting art lovers with artists and galleries. I mean, I wouldn't call it a social network as yet, but it's got a lot of influence of like social network and marketplace platform. Like, very interested to hear about the journey for the Dots, especially in the initial days. Like, how did you go about building that critical mass of creatives across the globe, maybe, or in certain geographies, and keep them engaged?
Okay, yeah, Pip, one for you.
Yeah, I mean, two-sided models are tough because obviously you can't grow clients and if you've got people and vice versa. What I did is I seed funded the business myself from a previous business in Australia. I identified about 100 key brands, companies here in the UK that I knew Creative wanted to work for, and I basically gave them a year free on the Dots to start using the site while we grew. And that sort of had the initial opportunities coming into the site while I was growing other clients and the community. In terms of community, we started with like influencers, and then I just obsessed about the product. Like, get that product right. Like, a lot of time people spend too much on marketing and PR in the early days, but get that product right, really understand your data, really understand how people are using it and how they're feeling used for it, and then they become the advocates. But it was also, we had strategic partnerships with like University Arts London at the beginning, the Soho House Group, but product's everything really.
Thank you. And actually, just very briefly, I think
Yes.
building on that, which I completely agree with, when you're at a very sort of nascent stage of technology, you're actually not quite sure what your product is because you're trying to figure out what your product is.
But
so,
it's great.
So if you think about Blipper, our product was the app, and then we grew that to a point where actually there's more to this. So then the product became the cognition and the recognition of the physical world. So then you invest a lot in computer vision, and then you move on from there. We sort of had 3 or 4 big steps along the way, and now what we realize is that actually our product, more than anything else, is the platform that allows people to create content, and you democratize AR. But that's it's a 6-7 year process to actually understand what that product is in the first place, and then you really go for it. So, yeah.
It's almost like the art of running your businesses is making sure that you are keeping pace with how the community are. It feels, particularly what you're saying, Pip, it's almost like your community is saying, oh, I can see a way to use this. I often think that VR and AR is a technology, it's a solution that's looking for a problem to solve, and it's slowly finding the problems that it wants to solve. And it feels like you have to keep adapting to the way that people are, oh, I can use that community in this way.
I mean, and they do things with your product that you had no idea they were going to do.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful when you discover them. So, like, the tagging is a perfect example. We were originally a portfolio site, and then we just found all these people signing up that weren't creatives, but they were very fundamental to the creative process, like a producer. And so it was just connecting those dots, and that was data-driven. So, and understanding what people were wanting to hack us through. Also, I just realised under 35s hate LinkedIn, which is great.
There's a question. You had a question, and then there, and then there. Okay.
I know that you stayed away from the B word.
Oh, hang on a sec.
But we're talking about being global, and I was interested in knowing what your biggest challenge you felt at the moment was in retaining being global within your business, and perhaps the biggest opportunities you foresee in the next couple of years. A small question.
Does one of you want to take that?
I'm happy to take it. I mean, what would I say? It's had no impact on our business. And actually, I think I haven't been around all day, but I'm sure that the positivity and kind of the enthusiasm and the energy has come through very strongly today. And the reality is that business is just getting on with what it needs to get on with. Would we like to see a little bit more clarity? Yeah, of course. What is the most important part out of all of this for us? I've alluded to it already. Talent, and making sure that we have that free flow of talent is absolutely key. I mean, we're a dollar-funded business. So actually, the UK became much cheaper on June 23rd, 2016. So it doesn't have impact for us, but I do think that for the country and for a whole host of other reasons, the sooner we're able to kind of move on and kind of, this is a typical example. Do we mention the B word? We just need to kind of move on. And while I'm talking about that, I thought I'd give a little plug to the Department for International Trade, because actually navigating, as you think about international expansion, navigating your way through not just that as an issue, but more importantly, how to access markets, how to understand them, how to plug in, how to network appropriately, how to find clients, all that sort of thing. There's a lot of resource available, and it's in the government, and it's a good thing to use.
Yeah, I think for being on the front line, uncertainty is a problem. We're still, we're still the 5th biggest economy in the world. We're still the global creative hub, but uncertainty is a problem. Right, next question. Thank you.
Thanks. I represent Kingston Smith, and we are a media advisory firm, and we work quite actively on the UK-India corridor and the US-UK corridor. And interestingly, the more of the animated and the special effects movies that we see is a Hollywood movie produced by the special effects being done by a UK production house, and then you see a lot of Indian houses in the post-film credits, Indian names in terms of people who have worked on it. We were always toying with this idea of how can we create like a corridor between LA, London, and say Bangalore in terms of trying to make it like an ecosystem of the creative industry to make this a bit more structured. Any thoughts? And just building on that is also the other point that we spoke about in terms of computer science being made part of the curriculum, but what is the uptake for it? And that's where the peers who can probably come from India and work here, or that the immigration angle that comes into play, and that makes people take up more of this as a subject to study.
I'm going to take the first bit of that question because we've got one more question and probably 30 seconds.
I would create the corridor through the UK because I think that the UK and India have a cultural affinity, and it's worked. We merged with an Indian company in 2014. Lots of people thought that was going to be tricky. It's actually worked really, really well. We brought a lot of Indian artists over to the UK and trained them up. We've taken Western talent to our offices in India, and they're working there happily. And that's been incredibly effective. Also, the time zones work much better, which is an issue. It's tricky for our Vancouver office, so it's harder for our Vancouver office to work with our offices in Mumbai and Chennai because of the time difference. Through the UK works really, really well. And I love living in the UK. I don't want to move anywhere else. So I want DNEG to be headquartered in the UK forever. So it's an entirely partial part of the plan.
And as I said before, in Bangalore Technicolor, I have 3,500 people who are branded as Moving Picture Company and The Mill. Framestore just did a JV with Annie Brain in Pune, so you have that kind. Right, very last question is quickly. You had a question.
Yeah. So I run a small Createch company, and we have global clients, but we're not working globally yet. So I just wanted to get any tips or advice on that, especially with creative companies. Like, how do you get people to the best results across different time zones, different locations?
Stumped.
Sorry, how do you work with clients internationally or with talent?
International clients, but we're just based in London. So, but I'm thinking how come if we want? It seems to me like businesses are moving more globally.
Yeah.
There seems to be like a lot of problems, logistical problems to manage, especially with creative stuff where you.
Yeah.
It really helps to be in a room and discuss stuff.
It does. When we started DNEG, we had a very tough few years, and the only reason that we survived was because we'd get on an aeroplane once a month and go over to LA and go and knock on doors. Everybody would open the doors and let us in and talk to us, but they wouldn't pick up the phone if we phoned them. So even in a world of amazing tech, there is nothing like face-to-face contact and having a cup of coffee with somebody in our industry, I think.
And I don't think that's changed.
Yeah.
I think that it is still very much appreciated that you turn up. And actually, and funnily enough, I don't think it's changed. Even with video conferencing, and video conferencing can be amazing if you invest in the right systems. It still doesn't sort of improve on being there face to face. And I would say with colleagues as well, I find that at all levels we're trying to ensure people meet face to face and build those relationships. Because when you hit problems, you want to have that relationship. When you've got to pick the phone up to a client and say it's all gone horribly wrong, and it does a lot in our industry, and probably yours as occasionally as well. You want to have a relationship with that person. That would be.
So that's going to be the point at which we end. That amidst all of this global creativity and technology, we are, after all human, and every now and again we have to go and sit and talk to each other and look each other in the eye.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I ask you to thank my panel?